Let's talk about player choice. The Stanley parable sets up player choice in a way that I haven't seen in any other game, and it runs a lot deeper than you might think. So let's talk about it. In the process, we are going to spoil the Stanley parable, so go play it before you watch this video, okay? Okay. This game is about the dialogue between the player and the narrator, and therefore player choice is a critical part.
All of his co-workers were gone. What could it mean? Stanley decided to go to the meeting room. Perhaps he had simply missed a memo.
Now we can't talk, so our half of the dialogue is held up entirely by how we move around. The narrator watches where we go and integrates that into his narration. It's, a story. Most narrative games have some element of this. They'll pop up a little dialogue box asking you whether you want to do something good or do something evil. But those games are asking something fundamentally different from the Stanley parable. So let's look at that a little closer. Most games will ask you what you want to do. Do you want to save a baby, or do you want to eat every baby on the planet and then blow up the star? You're never going to get a nuanced response from the player. When you ask the player what they want to do, you cannot hear what they want to do, because what they want to do is clearly going to be more nuanced than the three options that you give them. This is why so many games have their options be so radically far apart. You just want the player to choose the least worst option. But that seems like a really poor way to connect to the player. Which of these is least worst? Oh, great. Way to really get me invested. This game doesn't do that. Instead, the Stanley parable will tell you what's going on and then ask if you want to see more. Watch.
When Stanley came to a set of 2 open doors, he entered the door on his left.
The narrator is telling you a story. Do you want more? Or do you want to rebel? Now, it's not always the fact that the narrator is telling you a story, but the game will always show you what's happening and then ask whether you want to see more or do something else.
Yet there was not a single person here either. Feeling a wave of disbelief, Stanley decided to go up to his boss's office. Coming to a staircase, Stanley walked upstairs to his boss's office.
The narrator is still telling you a story. Do you want to see more or do something else? Now, this sounds like it's the same question over and over and over, but unlike the do you want to be good or evil question that you often see in this sort of game, this is not the same question over and over and over because the context keeps changing. The story that the narrator is telling is continuing, and exactly what you want to do, what it means to continue to follow the story, is changing. For example,
stepping into his manager's office, Stanley was once again stunned to discover not an indication of any human life. Shocked, unraveled, Stanley wondered in disbelief who orchestrated this. What dark secret was being held from him? What he could not have known was that the keypad behind the boss's desk guarded the terrible truth that his boss had been keeping from him. And so the boss had assigned it an extra secret PIN number, 2845. But of course, Stanley couldn't possibly have known this.
So, the story has now advanced to the point where we're being asked, are you willing to follow along with this narrator's story even though it makes no sense? Even though it requires you to play around with meta-knowledge that you couldn't possibly know? Are you still on board? The context of this narrator's story keeps changing, and it will continue to keep change as you continue through the game. In this particular case, there is no actual no option. No matter what we do, the secret door opens. But our relationship with the narrator is different. If we input the number now, the narrator will be like, oh, look, he managed to figure it out, and we'll continue on. If we don't enter it in, the narrator will get steadily more annoyed at us and then just kind of pull us through, meaning that, we've kind of tweaked the narrator's nose. If we rush in and do it as fast as we can, the narrator gets annoyed at us for ignoring him and makes us sit around and listen to easy listening music. In each of these cases, The same final result happens, but our personal experience is very different, and that's really what this is about. In a lot of cases, what we are doing when we're offering player choice in a video game is we're trying to allow the player to build their own player experience out of narrative building blocks that the game offers.
All of his co-workers were gone. What could it mean? Stanley decided to go to the meeting room. Perhaps he had simply missed a memo.
But in this case, what we're really being asked is to stitch our player experience together out of experiences that the game can offer. We're just being asked which experiences we would like to have in ours. Another part of this is that none of these experiences are objective. We're not being asked to optimize reality. We're not being asked to come up with the best possible solution to an actual problem. Everything we're doing is an interaction with the narrator. This is incredibly important. Watch.
When Stanley came to a set of 2 open doors, he entered the door on his left.
We're not being asked which of these options is the better option for the universe as a whole. We're being asked whether we want to go along with the narrator or rebel against the narrator.
This was not the correct way to the meeting room, and Stanley knew it perfectly well. Perhaps he wanted to stop by the employee lounge first, just to admire it.
This is important because the game can never be allowed to misunderstand the player. But the player can never be understood. You're not going to be able to really understand what the player wants or feels because you can't ask it in a way where the player can give a response that is indicative of what they feel. This is kind of a conundrum. If the game isn't allowed to misunderstand, but the game cannot physically understand, what are you going to do? Well, the answer is you dump that misunderstanding into an arena where it's not the game's fault. In this case, a character. The narrator is a character. The narrator is allowed to misunderstand. The narrator is allowed to be loudmouthed, confused, pushy, overly kind, whatever. If we do something and the narrator misunderstands why we did it, that is completely fine, because that's the narrator doing that. That's the narrator's character. It's more than completely fine. It establishes our relationship with the narrator. It establishes a path forward. It establishes a conversation with the narrator. It allows us to know more about who the narrator is and the sort of conclusions they jump to. In this case, the narrator cannot possibly understand why we chose to ignore his suggestion. But he can react even if he doesn't understand.
Yes, truly a room worth admiring. It had really been worth the detour after all, just to spend a few moments here in this immaculate, beautifully constructed room. Stanley simply stood here, drinking it all in. But eager to get back to business, Stanley took the first open door on his left.
So if we go against the narrator's response is, "Oh, well, you went against me? Well, look what you found. A room. I bet you love this room. It's such an awesome room. Aren't you happy that you went against me to find a room?" He's a sarcastic little whiner. And then he has us get back on course by going that way, which we can do.
And so he detoured through the maintenance section, walked straight ahead to the opposite door, and got back on track.
And as always, do you want to continue to hear the story or not? We'll go ahead and continue.
Yet there was not a single person here either. Feeling a wave of disbelief, Stanley decided to go up to his boss's office, hoping he might find an answer there.
So far, we have seen a lot of examples of Stanley and the player choosing whether or not to go along with the narrator's dialogue or reject it. But that's not anywhere near the entirety of what you can do. In many cases, what's going on here is not enabled consciously by a character. It's not specifically to go along with what a character says they want. Instead, it's just whatever the game thinks would be a fun chunk of experience, as often enabled by a character. Here's an example of that. This broom closet is something that the narrator doesn't care about. The narrator doesn't even comment on it. But the game devs have marked it as important. The game devs have made it the only door in the hallway, well lit, with a custom signature, a custom logo on it. Clearly, this is something that the game devs think is important enough for you to interact with, even though the narrator hasn't commented on it. This difference between the game devs' priorities and the narrator's priorities is the whole point of this broom closet situation. So I'm going to go in here and I'm just going to let it play out. As it plays out, I want you to see how each step of the way is the game devs themselves saying, this is how it's going. Do you want to see more? Do you want to hear more from the narrator? Do you want to see more about the narrator's character and the way the narrator responds to this situation?
Stanley stepped into the broom closet, but there was nothing here, so he turned around and got back on track. There was nothing here. No choice to make, no path to follow, just an empty broom closet. No reason to still be here. It was baffling that Stanley was still just sitting in the broom closet. He wasn't even doing anything. At least if there was something to interact with, he'd be justified in some way. As it is, he's literally just standing there doing sweet FA. Are you really still in the broom closet? Standing around doing nothing? Why? Please offer me some explanation here. I'm genuinely confused.
All right, just one more.
You do realize there's no choice or anything in here, right? If I'd said Stanley walked past the broom closet, at least you would have had a reason for exploring it to find out. But it didn't even occur to me because literally this closet is of absolutely no significance to the story whatsoever. I never would have thought to mention it.
Yeah, maybe one more. We'll torture the narrator together with the game here.
Maybe to you this is somehow its own branching path. Maybe when you go talk about this with your friends, you'll say, "Oh, did you get the broom closet ending? The broom closet ending was my favorite." I hope your friends find this concerning.
He'll continue to go on. In fact, he'll eventually consider us dead, and then we can be replaced by player 2, and there's actually a fair number of other things that happen in subsequent playthroughs. Eventually, he'll nail the door shut. But the point is that this is not something where we either agree or disagree with the narrator, because that was never the only way this stuff could be set up. Everything we do is the game offering us a specific experience and us deciding whether or not we want that experience. In this case, the game is attempting to draw out the narrator's character. Do you want to see how the narrator will react if you constantly needle him? In this case, we did. We didn't go along with it forever just because it goes on for another like 5 minutes. But the point here is every action in this game that the player can choose is simply an experience that the game has snapped together for us, and we can choose whether to go along with that experience or whether to back out. And we can even allow it to continue and later decide whether or not we want to back out now or whether we want to continue. Maybe we'll be given the option to double down or hedge. But at no point are we asked what we want to do. We're always just asked whether we want to have more of this experience. Now, in this case, it's very, very restrained. I've just shown you some of the most basic stuff involving the character of the narrator and using the character of the narrator and his misunderstandings to help make this system work. But the truth is, this can be used in a tremendous variety of situations. The 2022 content, for example, this is all 2013 content. The 2022 content is more based on irony and levels of remove. We can show you that real quick. Just an example of it here.
All of his co-workers were gone. What could it mean? Stanley decided to go to the meeting room. Is Stanley without the bucket really Stanley at all? No, surely not.
So by introducing the bucket, the narrator now has a level of remove that he can use to reinterpret all of Stanley's behaviors.
Stanley clutched the bucket tightly to his chest and entered the door on his left.
This allows the narrator to project through the bucket, which allows us to know even more about what the narrator wants, how the narrator feels, and so on. Obviously, the fact that it's just a bucket is a joke. It's part of the joke. But this choice that we've made to pick up the bucket at the beginning of the game rearranges all of the experiences over the course of the game to mean different things.
Still no one was here. Stanley needed the bucket's warmth and comfort now more than ever. Perhaps his boss's office was where he'd find answers. Stanley, we must move on from this broom closet, simply because I have no remaining stickers. If I did, you can guarantee we'd be in here for hours. But alas, no stickers.
The point here is there are a lot of techniques to this. I don't want anyone to think that this is all just about going along with a character or rejecting a character. Let me give you an example. You're playing Mass Effect, and instead of the ending we got, there is an ending where you have to go into a giant citadel, and there's a bank of computers controlling the universe, and you have to free the universe by dealing with these computers. Who did you bring with you? In that case, the choice wouldn't be whether or not to continue with a specific experience or reject a specific experience. You would instead be choosing who is the best choice to save the world. Whose saving of the world do you want to see? If you bring Tally, who's a big computer nerd, then you're going to go for the big computery ending, and it's going to be all computery. If you go for Rex, who hates computers, you're going to get to the computer banks, and he's going to go, I hate computers, Shepard. And then he's going to shoot the computer bank, and you'll save the universe by literally shooting a computer. In these cases, we're not choosing yes or no. We're not even choosing whether or we want a specific experience to continue. Instead, we're seeing that a specific experience is coming up, and we're choosing which of these pre-existing pieces might twist that situation into an experience that suits us today, like carrying around a bucket in order to change the overall dynamic of this game.
Coming to a staircase, Stanley and the bucket walked upstairs to the boss's office.
Nah.
But Stanley just couldn't do it. He considered the possibility of facing his boss, admitting he had left his post during work hours. He might be fired for that. And in such a competitive economy, why had he taken that risk? All because he believed everyone had vanished? His boss would think he was crazy. And then something occurred to Stanley. Maybe, he thought to himself, maybe I am crazy. He looked down at the bucket in his arms. Am I crazy? He asked the bucket.
You get the point. So all of this is a set of powerful tools, but it's just the foundation. There are so many ways that you can use this basic concept, and that's some of the stuff we're going to cover in later videos. I just wanted to make sure we understood the foundation. The foundation is that you present the player with the option to go on an experience. Rather than asking the player what they want to do, you give them the option to go on a specific experience. It doesn't necessarily have to be an experience that moves the game forward or make any sense. It just has to be something that they will enjoy going through, or at least be interested in going through. And that's fundamentally different from the way that most games do player choice. And it's something we can learn from. Yeah. See you around.